Hi, I'm Celine. The day my father fired me from the company I built, he said, "You're too weak to lead." My mother? She didn't even look at me. They thought I'd vanish quietly. But what they didn't know was that Grandpa left me something no boardroom could ever touch. 2 months later, when I walked into that emergency shareholder meeting, Mom dropped her coffee and I smiled. "Shall we begin? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? Morning, evening? Drop it in the comments. Because this story, it's not just about betrayal, it's about inheritance, silence, and revenge served in full view. They'd brought out the good coffee. That should have been the first clue. The mahogany-paneled boardroom rarely smelled like anything but varnish and stress, but today it had a hint of dark roast and cinnamon, as if we were celebrating something. I sat at the far end of the glass table, wearing my best navy blazer, the one I kept for quarterly reports and investor pitches. My hands were folded neatly over the manila folder I'd prepared. Inside were the latest projections for our oncology pipeline, 10 years of work compressed into 12 graphs and 3 bullet points. I'd barely slept. I'd even skipped breakfast. But I told myself it was worth it. To my right, my older brother Ethan scrolled absently on his phone. To my left, my mother stirred her coffee with a slow, looping rhythm. Her silver bracelet clinked quietly every time the spoon hit the cup's edge. And at the head of the table, my father leaned back in his leather chair, hands steepled like he was conducting a prayer, not a meeting. I cleared my throat and started. Phase 2 results on the new compound look promising. We're seeing increased T-cell activity, particularly in the refractory cases. The team at Cambridge Biolabs thinks... "We've decided," my father said, cutting through my words like a scalpel, "to move in a different direction." My voice caught mid-sentence. I blinked, confused. "Different direction? With what?" "With leadership," he replied. Calm. Casual. Like we were talking about paint colors. "We've unanimously agreed it's time for someone with a steadier hand. Someone who understands the gravity of the role." I glanced around the room. Ethan suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. My mother didn't look up. "Wait, what are you saying?" I asked. "You're being relieved of your position, Madeline," he said, still calm, "effective immediately." There was no discussion, no performance review, just that one sentence, like it had been waiting in his throat all morning. He kept going. "This isn't punishment, it's a redirection. You're brilliant, no one's denying that, but brilliance can't replace maturity. You've let emotions dictate too many key decisions." Gaslighting, neatly packaged in corporate vocabulary. "And who decided that?" I asked quietly. "We all did." He looked at Ethan, who gave a stiff nod, then at my mother. She still didn't meet my eyes, just stirred her coffee again. Clink, clink, clink. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. "You're saying I'm not mature enough to run the division I built?" My voice cracked despite my best effort. "We're saying you need time to reflect." My father always had a talent for control. Never yelling, never rage, just calm cruelty in a tailored suit. I stood up slowly, the chair's legs screeching against the tile. No one moved, no one said a word. I think that hurt most of all, how easy it was for them to look away. I reached for my folder, then stopped. What was the point? They didn't want the data. They wanted me gone. In the hallway, the air felt colder. I walked past portraits of the company's founders, my grandfather among them. He used to tell me stories about integrity, about grit. I wondered what he'd think of this boardroom coup. The elevator ride down was long and silent. Each floor we passed felt like another layer of my identity peeling off. Scientist, partner, executive, daughter. By the time the doors opened to the underground garage, I was just a woman in heels holding a leather tote bag she no longer had a reason to carry. I found my car, slid in, shut the door, and just sat there. The kind of stillness that isn't peace, just shock. 10 years. I gave up an engagement, missed funerals, canceled vacations, poured every bit of myself into that company, and in 2 minutes, I became a liability. I stared at the steering wheel until the tears stopped threatening. Then, without thinking, I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old envelope, something I'd kept there since college. Inside, a note in my mother's handwriting. "Speak clearly, never loudly. They'll listen if they respect you." I used to think that was power. That silence was elegance. Now I see it was permission. Permission to let others talk over me, drown me out, cut me off. I whispered to the empty car, "I won't beg to be heard anymore." As I reached for my phone to check the time, a new message lit up the screen. Unknown number. Just 5 words. "They underestimated you. Keep going." I frowned. Read it twice. Who? Before I could reply, my lips twitched, just slightly. Not a smile. Not yet. But something was shifting. I didn't even realize I'd been staring at the message for nearly 5 full minutes. The words blinked back at me. Simple. Sharp. "They underestimated you." I shifted slightly on the edge of my bed, where I'd been sitting since getting back from the boardroom earlier that morning. The navy blue blazer I hadn't taken off still clung to me like a second skin, creased, stiff, and now oddly symbolic. Boston traffic murmured outside my window. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's dog barked twice, then quieted. Still, that message echoed louder than anything else. I scrolled back again to look at it. Just a single sentence, no punctuation, no name, just a New York area code. My thumb hovered over the screen. I typed, "Who is this?" Then deleted it. Typed again, "Wrong person?" Then backspaced the entire thing. On the third try, I settled on something that felt more like me. "I'm listening." I hit send. The read receipt didn't appear. For a moment, I considered tossing the phone aside and calling it a night, but just as I stood up, stretching the ache from my lower back, it buzzed. Calling. Ray Lerner. The name made my breath catch. Ray? 2 years ago, he'd been the only person in that cold, polished boardroom who ever looked at me like I belonged there, not as a daughter doing her father a favor, but as someone who had earned every inch of her place. "Mel." His voice came through calm, like a lake before dawn. "I'm sorry it happened like this." I sat back down slowly, letting his voice settle into me like warm tea on a cold day. "I should have said something when I left," he continued, "but you were still in the thick of it, and I knew he'd twist anything I said." "You saw it coming?" I asked, almost whispering. "I saw it building. The second you started asking real questions about the trial phase delays, your father began pushing you out. He hates accountability unless he controls it." I closed my eyes. "So, the message?" "Was me," Ray confirmed. "And a few others you haven't heard from in a while. Let's just say not everyone on that shareholder list drinks the Kool-Aid." I almost laughed. Almost. "You're not done, Mel. You just haven't started the real thing yet." I sat in silence. For the first time in days, I wasn't replaying my father's words in that boardroom or the way my mother stared into her coffee cup while my title evaporated into thin air. Instead, I remembered something else. Ray standing beside me during a late strategy meeting years ago. He had looked up from a market report and said, "You see things your father's never had to earn. That's why they scare him." He had meant it as a compliment. Back then, I'd just smiled and changed the subject. "You're in Boston?" he asked now. I nodded instinctively before realizing he couldn't see me. "Yes." "Come to New York this weekend. Stay at the house in Tarrytown. It's quiet. You'll have time to think. I'll bring the files we've gathered. You'll want to see the voting patterns. The board's more fractured than he lets on." "I'm not sure I'm ready for all this," I admitted. "Good," he said gently. "That means you're thinking. Just show up. That's all I'm asking." When we hung up, the apartment felt bigger somehow, like something had cracked open just enough to let light in. I walked over to the built-in bookshelf in the corner of my bedroom and reached behind a row of dusty biotech journals. My fingers found it, the soft leather notebook I hadn't touched since last fall. It was full of plans, real ones, ideas the board had brushed off as too ambitious, notes on partnerships I'd spent months cultivating, strategies the CFO, well, the former CFO now, had once told me would muddy the brand. I flipped to the last written page. There, scribbled in quick ink, was a quote I had jotted down years ago. I remember my mother had said it on a rare soft morning, back when she still wore lavender perfume and hummed while ironing shirts. When they stop listening, build something they can't ignore. I ran my thumb over the faded writing, feeling something shift again in my chest. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding slowly escaped. This wasn't going to be about revenge, not entirely. It was about building, quietly, carefully, unapologetically. I pulled a pen from the drawer and underlined the quote. Then I began jotting names: contacts, investors, data analysts, compliance auditors, people who had always returned my calls, even when my last name made them hesitate. I didn't know exactly what would come next, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to wait for someone else to hand me permission. I moved to the bathroom and stared into the mirror. My eyes looked tired but steady. There was a strange calm in me now, the kind that comes after a storm breaks and the silence settles. "Let's begin," I said aloud. Then I reached for my phone and dialed a name I hadn't said in years: my lawyer. I didn't sleep much after that call. My brain wouldn't stop, turning over old conversations, buried documents, whispers in boardrooms I hadn't been invited into. By the time the sun scraped across the window panes, I was already dressed, pacing my living room, coffee forgotten on the counter. I'd called Maria the night before, just after hanging up with Ray. I didn't say much, just, "I need you in person. Bring the original charter, and bring caffeine." By 9, she was at my door, brisk and unbothered by the early hour. Maria's the kind of attorney who wears pearls like armor and carries her arguments in a manila folder thicker than most small-town phone books. She handed me the printout and a steaming paper cup. "You were fired under a vote that was illegal if Clause 14B still holds," she said without preamble, dropping her purse onto my dining chair. I blinked. 14B? She flipped through the charter until she found it, then slid the document across the table. Any child of a founder who holds more than 15% equity and was appointed to executive position by founding authority cannot be removed by simple board majority. A supermajority is required. That's the clause. My fingers tightened around the coffee cup. I was appointed by my father, publicly, at the 2016 Biotech Summit. There were cameras. Maria nodded. "I remember. Your picture was in Forbes the next morning." I sat back slowly. I could still feel the heat of that day, the flashbulbs, the tremble in my father's voice when he called me the next generation. He'd said it proudly, like I was his legacy, like he meant it. Apparently he hadn't. Or maybe he had, back then. Before my sister started whispering that I was too soft, too distracted by diapers and preschool runs. Before I left for maternity leave and he mistook silence for weakness. "He said I'd be too emotional for litigation," I said aloud, mostly to myself. Maria gave a thin smile. "Then let's not give them litigation. Let's give them legal consequence." I watched her open her laptop and begin compiling timelines. I didn't speak, just watched. I wasn't emotional. I was methodical now, just like they taught me not to be. Mid-morning slid into early afternoon as we worked. At one point, Maria leaned back and frowned. "1 month before they removed you, they filed a bylaw update, but this version," she tapped the screen, "shows no record of your consent." My eyes narrowed. "They tried to override Clause 14B? "Yes, but here's the catch. You were still officially vice president then. Your signature was required for any constitutional amendment." I stared at the screen. "And I never signed it." Maria glanced at me over her glasses. They cooked the paperwork, sloppily at that. I exhaled through my nose. Not from anger, but recognition. That was their pattern. Rush, override, and hope no one looks too closely. And I'd let them. I'd been too tired, too distracted. But I wasn't tired anymore. At 3:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Ray." I excused myself to the hallway and answered. "You've been busy," he said, voice calm, measured. "So have you." He chuckled. 3 silent shareholders just confirmed. They'll back a move. If you lead. No drama, no media. They want proof of competence, not a soap opera. I can give them that, I said. No theatrics. Just process. There was a pause. I'm glad you're ready. I was. After the call, I returned to the table. Maria looked up. I gave a small nod. Let's file for an injunction, quietly. She closed her laptop. Already drafted. We can submit electronically by 5. The rest of the day blurred. Digital signatures, legal forms, silent decisions. We didn't send a press release. No calls to the family, no warnings. Just one cold, clean motion to freeze any further board action until the legality of my firing was examined. We knew it would shake them. But what I didn't expect was what came next. That night, just as I was rinsing my face in the bathroom, my phone lit up. A message from an unfamiliar contact. No words, just a photo. My old desk, cleared out, and a single line of text beneath it. Guess who's moving in? The message blinked on my screen long after I'd stopped staring at it. Guess who's moving in? No name, just a photo of my old office being emptied. The chair I once sat in now tilted awkwardly, half dismantled. I didn't reply. I didn't flinch. I simply locked my phone and turned off the lights. 3 days later, Maria met me in her office with a large manila folder, 2 coffees, and a face that said, "Something stinks." "Let's talk about ghosts," she said, sliding the folder across the glass table. I flipped it open. Voting logs, company board minutes, a highlighted spreadsheet with names I hadn't seen in years. 2 of these shareholders have been dead for months, she said plainly, yet their votes were counted against you. My fingers froze over the page. Are you sure? She nodded. Certified death certificates, obituaries, funeral programs. I double-checked. And this one, Rajan Patel. Technically still alive but hasn't attended a single meeting in 4 years. Suddenly he shows up to vote, and not in your favor. Something twisted in my gut. This wasn't just negligence, this was orchestration. I want to talk to his son, I said. Not a lawyer, me. That afternoon, I drove out past Cambridge to a modest house tucked between 2 strip malls. The address on Patel's shareholder file matched. A young man in his 30s opened the door, suspicious but polite. I'm not selling anything, I said. I worked with your father. I just need to ask one thing. We sat in his kitchen. Old photos of Rajan Patel lined the fridge, a smiling man in thick glasses holding grandchildren I never knew he had. My dad passed away in March, his son said quietly. Why? I showed him a copy of the proxy vote. He stared. He never assigned that, and even if he had, my father couldn't hold a pen in the last months. You're saying your father used his name to vote? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He looked down. I didn't even know your dad still used my father's name. Neither did I, until now. I returned to Boston with my stomach in knots and Maria's eyes narrowing further with each new page. We traced back the voting records for the past 6 months. Same proxy name appeared over and over. My father's assistant. Out of 25 silent shareholders, 5 had used her as their designated proxy. 3 were legally dead. 1 had advanced dementia. The 5th, a woman who'd been my father's personal secretary for 20 years, was now in hospice, and her children had no idea she still technically owned shares. I don't think any of these people actually voted, Maria said. They just signed forms. Or someone else signed for them. I picked up one document. The signature trembled so much it looked like a child's drawing. This is not just immoral, Maria muttered. This is prosecutable. She stood, walked over to her desk, and paced. We should go to the press. This could blow the entire board apart. This is fraud, plain and simple. I didn't speak right away. Leaking this now would backfire, I said. They'd say I'm desperate. They'd paint it as bitterness. A daughter mad she lost. Maria crossed her arms. And what do you call this? Strategy, I said calmly. We let it simmer, build pressure, quietly, methodically. She didn't like it, but she knew I was right. That night, we drafted affidavits for each of the deceased or incapacitated shareholders. Maria started contacting next of kin for sworn statements. Nothing loud, no press, just shadows moving where they needed to. 3 days passed. I didn't speak to my father. I didn't need to. Each morning, I got a new update from Maria. One by one, families confirmed the signatures weren't legitimate. No proxies had been legally granted. One man, whose mother had been bedridden for 2 years, simply whispered over the phone, "I always knew he'd find a way to use her one last time." Then, just after 9 p.m., my phone rang. I was sitting in my apartment, the window open, letting in the heavy Boston summer air. I almost didn't answer, but I recognized the number. "Please," my mother said quietly, "don't go through with this." I didn't reply. "You'll destroy him," she said. "You don't understand what this will do to our family." I leaned back, the phone pressed to my ear. "No, Mom, I understand exactly what this will do." When I hung up, I didn't cry. I just sat there on the couch, the phone still warm in my hand, her voice echoing in my ears like a song I hadn't chosen to hear. "Please don't go through with this," she'd said, quiet, almost pleading. "You'll destroy your father. Not you'll destroy the company. Not you'll destroy yourself. Just him." I turned off the lamp beside me, letting the dark take the room. Outside my apartment window, the city didn't sleep, but I needed it to hush. I leaned back, let my head rest on the cushion, and let the silence grow heavy. It didn't take long before my mind dragged me backward, back to that one birthday, my 13th. She had baked a simple vanilla cake. I still remember the smell of it filling the tiny kitchen. She even tried writing my name in blue frosting with a shaky hand. I was so excited, just her and me. No board meetings, no tense dinners with men who talked over me like I was furniture. Then the landline rang. I knew that tone in her voice before she said a word. I saw the change in her face. "Your father needs me. Urgent board dinner." She looked at me and smiled like it didn't matter, like the candles could wait. "We'll celebrate another day," she'd whispered. That day never came. I didn't eat the cake. It sat on the counter for days until the frosting cracked and the sponge dried out. I never said a word. I just learned to stop expecting. That's what my mother taught me without ever saying it. Expect less. 2 days passed since that late-night call. I didn't answer her follow-up messages, just let them sit unread. I had other things to do, like quietly preparing what I knew would rattle everything. Maria came over that morning with a thick folder of affidavits and her laptop already booted. We worked from my dining table, mugs of black coffee growing cold beside us. "There's enough here to pressure the board," she said, flipping through the signatures. 5 silent shareholders, 3 confirmed deceased, 1 legally incapacitated, 1 unreachable, and never officially reassigned. "Your father used their names to swing the vote," she added, "and the proxy on all of them." She held up the document. "His assistant, every single one." I stared at the names. Familiar, distant. Some were faces I'd only seen at holiday functions long ago. Others I barely remembered. But one thing was clear. Their silence wasn't consent. It was manipulation. "You sat there while he fired me," I had told Mom. Didn't even blink. Her reply echoed in my head. "You don't know what he's done for this family. He protected us." Protected who? From what? I excused myself, walked to my room, and opened the old leather box I'd taken from Dad's study the night Maria and I pulled records. At the bottom, beneath yellowing tax forms and embossed stationery, I found it. A letter in a plain white envelope. No stamp. Just my name on the front in his handwriting. I stood frozen for a moment, then sat slowly on the edge of the bed. The letter was brief, too brief for the weight it carried. "You were never meant to lead. I made sure of that the day I changed the trust. It's not personal. It's protection. Love, Dad." My fingers clenched the page, but I didn't rip it. I just stared at it, not meant to lead. He rewrote my future before I had the chance to write it myself. And Mom? She had to know. She knew about every legal move he made. She always had. She was there when he rewrote wills, when he added clauses, when he excluded names. She may have never signed, but she never stopped him either. She didn't protect me, she preserved him. I carried the letter back into the dining area. Maria looked up, alarmed at whatever she saw on my face. I handed her the paper without a word. After reading it, she exhaled slowly. "This is damning," she said. "We add this as Exhibit C." I nodded. "It stays sealed for now." That night, I sat alone again. Apartment quiet, TV off, lights low, the letter back in its folder. I stood in front of the hallway mirror, my reflection tired but steady. My hand grazed the manila tab labeled Exhibit C. "I hope you're watching, Mom," I said softly, not out of spite, not even to blame her, but because somewhere, maybe deep down, I still wanted her to witness what I was about to do and finally choose a side. By the time the morning light pushed through my curtains, the letter was already tucked away, filed under Exhibit C behind glass in my home safe. I hadn't slept, but I didn't need to. My exhaustion had evolved into something sharper, like a blade honed overnight by the weight of memory and truth. At 8:46 a.m., I stepped into the lobby of Sutton Holdings headquarters with my binder in hand. One hand. I didn't need a briefcase or a parade of assistants. I needed exactly what I had: proof, precision, and presence. The elevator ride was silent, except for the ding of each passing floor. My reflection in the chrome walls stared back at me, composed, contained, but burning underneath. When the doors opened to the executive level, I didn't pause. The boardroom glass was tinted from the outside, but I could see shadows. 12 figures seated already, one at the head of the table, my father. I turned the handle and walked in. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A chair creaked. Coffee cups froze mid-air. All eyes shifted toward me, the youngest daughter, the one they thought they'd erased. I moved to the open seat opposite my father. I didn't sit. "Miss Sutton," came the clipped voice of Mr. Dewey, the board secretary. "You weren't expected." My father didn't even blink. "You don't have standing here anymore." I placed the binder gently on the table, opened it, and slid a document toward him. "That's what I came to correct." He glanced at it, then leaned back in his chair, lips pressed into a flat line. "This is a waste of everyone's time." "No," I said, my voice steady. "What's in this binder is a record of misappropriated company funds, hidden LLCs, and private assets funneled into vacation homes in Montana and Geneva, not to mention double salary structures for your friends listed as consultants, all under your name." Gasps flickered across the table. My eyes scanned the room. "I didn't come here to beg," I said. "I came to warn." Silence stretched like wire. I turned the next page. "If this goes to the press, it's not just you who'll fall. It's every board member who signed off without reading, every stakeholder who turned a blind eye. But I'd rather not burn it all down. I'm offering a way through." Dewey reached for the binder and began flipping. My father didn't move, just stared at me, the way a poker player studies a hand he wasn't expecting. "You've been busy," he finally said. "You have no idea," I replied. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. It was worn, like it had traveled through time and intent. I slid it toward Dewey. "Page 7, grandfather's clause." "What clause?" one board member asked. "In his will," I said, "in the event of sustained financial or ethical mismanagement by the majority holder, oversight transfers to an independent trust. It's old, but it's still legally binding." "That trust was dissolved," my father said sharply. "No," I answered. "It was dormant. I reactivated it 6 weeks ago with the full backing of grandfather's original legal firm." A short man at the end of the table cleared his throat. I received a notice last week from someone labeled External Audit Oversight." "That was you?" I nodded. "It had to come from inside." The room tilted. My father's knuckles whitened as he gripped the arm of his chair. "You went behind my back. I walked through the front door. You just weren't watching." He stood. "You think this makes you powerful? You're a child playing with matches." I didn't flinch. "No, I'm the fire alarm." I reached into my binder again, this time revealing a document with a notarized signature and timestamp dated the day before I was removed from the company. Before my dismissal, someone signed over 18.2% of company shares to a temporary holding LLC. Those shares were my mother's, legally transferred. His eyes flicked toward my mother, seated quietly in the back row. "And that LLC?" I continued. "I own it." His face turned a shade I couldn't name. "You stole it." "No," I said, inching closer, looking him square in the eye. "I safeguarded it. From you." My mother didn't speak. She stared at the table, hands folded, still. I looked at the board. "You have enough grounds for a vote. The emergency shareholder clause allows for it." Dewey shifted in his seat. "She's correct. The charter allows it." The murmuring rose again, like an awakening. Some faces showed disbelief, others, relief. My father stood, pacing now. "This is a farce. She's bluffing." "You can call my bluff," I said, "or you can check the registry. The documents are filed, time-stamped, and reviewed." He turned to my mother. "Tell them you didn't authorize it." Her voice was soft. I signed it. For a long beat, no one moved. Then Dewey cleared his throat. "We'll call for a vote. Majority shareholder status must be recognized first." The lawyer at the far end raised a hand. "I've reviewed the ownership breakdown as of this morning. The new majority owner will speak now." I stood. The chair didn't even creak. I met every pair of eyes in the room, some curious, some rattled. One, my father's, burning with disbelief. "Let's begin," I said. I took one breath, steady and deep, as the lawyer's voice faded into silence. The room didn't erupt. It didn't have to. Every eye was already on me. I adjusted my blazer, stepped forward, and placed the folder flat on the mahogany table. "Thank you," I said calmly. "There will be no sweeping changes overnight, but effective today, the structure of oversight and accountability in this company changes. For good." A murmur rippled across the room like the creak of an old ship adjusting its course. Most of them looked stunned. One man leaned back, arms crossed, clearly amused. "I'll admit," he said with a low chuckle, "I didn't think you had it in you." I held his gaze unblinking. Neither did they. It wasn't arrogance, it was history. They had all watched me grow up in the shadow of boardroom doors they never thought I'd enter. The rest of the meeting passed in crisp formality. Transition frameworks, legal oversight, shareholder communication. I led it all without needing to raise my voice, but beneath my skin, every word cost something. By the time the room emptied, I felt both electrified and hollow, like I'd claimed something, but left something behind. Just as the last board member exited, I spotted her, my mother, slipping her handbag onto her shoulder, trying not to look at me. I took the chance. Quietly, I crossed the room and touched her arm. "Walk with me." She didn't resist. We moved out of the boardroom into a side hallway where the lights were dimmer and the tension sharper. The glass windows lining the wall gave a view of the city beyond. Calm, indifferent. "Did you know?" I asked. My voice was level, but inside everything nodded. She didn't answer immediately. Her lips pressed together like she was picking which lie to use. About what happened, about Dad, the firing, the trust being stripped from me. Her eyes flickered. "Yes," she whispered. The world tilted a fraction. "I knew," she went on. "I didn't want to. But I did." I blinked. "You watched them push me out, and you said nothing." Her hands clutched her purse tighter. "You were easier to lose." The words didn't hit like a slap. They didn't shout. They landed like a dull blade in soft places, slow, unforgiving. "I was protecting the balance," she said, avoiding my eyes now. "If I'd interfered, your father would have cut me off too?" I didn't know how far he'd take it." "Yes, you did." My voice was barely above a breath. She turned her face toward the window. I'm not proud of it, but I did what I thought I had to do. For survival. I thought of all the nights I'd sat alone, wondering why no one stood up for me. I remembered the silence. The one person who could have said, "Wait," and didn't. You raised me to believe I could fix things, I said, eyes burning. But the moment something broke in this family, you let me be the piece that cracked. She said nothing, just turned and walked away without looking back. I stood there, anchored in a hallway that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old money, when a childhood memory broke through like a ghost cracking glass. I was 6, sitting on the edge of my parents' bed while she brushed my hair. The strokes were gentle. She had said, "You're the one who'll fix it all someday." I had smiled. Back then, I thought it meant I was special, chosen, loved. Now I knew. I wasn't cherished. I was tasked. I pushed the memory aside and walked toward the elevators. But I didn't make it far. He was waiting, my father, standing just around the corner in that crisp charcoal suit, like always. But his face wasn't smug this time. It was cold. "You think this is over?" he hissed. No boardroom, no pretense. I held my ground. "I think it's finally being seen for what it is." He stepped closer. "You blind little girl. You think you can win just because you've got a few legal tricks? You were nothing before I put you in that seat." "I was nothing to you," I corrected, but I kept the receipts. His jaw clenched. "I'll fight this. You'll see." "You already signed it," I said, pulling a flash drive from my pocket and holding it up between us. "The forged contract, the one you filed to force me out last quarter? It voids your severance and, more importantly, it's fraud." He blinked. I leaned in just enough for him to hear. "The board doesn't know yet, but if you touch me, retaliate, or smear my name, they will." His voice dropped to a growl. "You planned this." "No." I stared at him, clear-eyed. "You trained me for this." He froze, as if seeing me for the first time. Then, without a word, he turned and walked down the corridor. Not with power, but with the quiet weight of a man whose kingdom had cracked. I returned to the boardroom. It was empty now. The chairs pushed in, the windows gold with the late-day sun. My mother's perfume still lingered in the air, light, expensive, forgettable. I stood alone. For the first time, truly alone. But not broken. Just aware. This was the cost of cutting out rot. A soft knock broke the silence. I turned. A young woman stood at the door, one of the firm's assistants. She held an envelope in both hands, a little wrinkled at the corners. "This just came in, couriered by hand," she said, almost whispering. "It's from your grandfather." My breath caught. I took it slowly. The envelope was heavy, my name written in his old, firm hand. I opened it, and what I saw turned my stomach to ice. The secretary's hand lingered as she passed me the envelope, as if she too sensed it carried something heavier than paper. I nodded, more out of habit than thanks, and she stepped away, the soft click of the boardroom door closing behind her sounding louder than it should have. I held the envelope for a moment. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Grandfather's looping cursive, clean and deliberate even in his final months. No mistaking it. I slid my finger beneath the flap and opened it. Inside, a single sheet. No legal jargon, no signatures. Just his voice, the way I remembered it before his health declined. "You were the only one who stayed when my hands trembled." My chest tightened. I remembered that morning. Everyone else had rushed off to a board brunch, but I stayed back, holding his wrist steady while he shaved. He hadn't said anything back then, just nodded. The letter continued, every word deliberate. "I saw the greed long before it surfaced. I placed a clause, one that activates only if you're wrongfully forced out. They'll never know it existed unless they're foolish enough to cast you aside. If you're reading this, they did." I folded the letter and sat in stunned silence. My fingers tingled. My body went cold, then hot. He had known. He had prepared. And now, I had to find it. That night, I didn't sleep. I spent hours combing old family ledgers, scanning digital backups, even calling 2 of his former clerks who owed me favors. Nothing surfaced. It wasn't until early the next morning, when sunlight barely filtered through the office windows, that I remembered something he used to say whenever documents went missing. Real things hide where no one wants to go. The basement archive. 2 hours later, I was down there, pushing open the old metal door that groaned louder than I remembered. Dust floated in the air like unsettled ghosts. Fluorescent lights buzzed above as I walked between the shelves of old paper files, shipping manifests, and dusty corporate reports that hadn't been touched in years. Halfway down aisle C, behind a row of outdated vendor contracts, I found an old black ledger with a cracked leather spine. It wasn't labeled, but inside the cover, a loose page peeked out from behind a false bottom. I reached in and pulled it free. A sealed envelope. Same handwriting, same wax stamp I hadn't seen since I was 12. I opened it carefully. Inside was a notarized amendment, dated just 3 weeks before his passing. Legal. Stamped. Signed. My hands shook as I read the clause. If the primary successor is removed by the board without an affirmative majority vote from all active employees, said removal is null and void. Control of Sutton Holdings reverts to the successor outlined in this document. My name, my full name, typed, undeniable. The board had fired me, not the employees. My removal, invalid. They'd broken the very clause meant to protect me. And I knew exactly who could confirm this. I didn't call, I didn't text. I just drove. Richard Bellamy lived just outside town, in a quiet colonial home with ivy swallowing one side of the stone porch. He answered the door himself, still in his gray cardigan, glasses low on his nose. He looked older than I remembered, but the moment he saw the envelope in my hand, he stepped aside without a word. We sat in his study. Shelves towered around us. A faint smell of pipe smoke still lingered. He unfolded the paper, read in silence, then nodded slowly. I was wondering how long it would take, he said. Your grandfather said you'd find it. Is it real? Completely. He filed it with me privately, didn't even tell your father, said he had only one heir he trusted, called you the iron thread that keeps the fabric from unraveling. I swallowed hard. What happens now? He stood and opened a locked drawer in his desk. Inside was a small iron key attached to a thin leather strap. Your grandfather left this with me, said you'd know what to do with it when the time came. It's for the private fund he built, offshore, untouched. A war chest, essentially. For what war? I asked. Richard looked me straight in the eye. The one that comes after you take back what's yours. I drove straight back to the office, didn't stop for coffee, didn't check my phone. Once I reached my desk, I scanned the amendment and attached it to an email. No long message, no legal explanation, just one sentence. Effective immediately, please refer to me as chairwoman. I hit send. The screen blinked, emails queued out, then one bounced back. Delivery failed. Sender, mother, subject line, out of country. No return. I stared at the screen. No return. Not just from the email, from me, from everything that once held this family together. The bounce-back notification stared at me like an echo from a place I couldn't reach anymore. My mother. Out of country. No return. That phrase rolled around in my mind like loose gravel, unsettling, out of place, and full of meanings she'd never say to my face. I didn't sleep that night. By sunrise, I was reviewing our old family logs, the ones Grandpa used to keep hidden behind the cabinet in his office. Flight records, maintenance invoices. Her name had popped up before under aliases I recognized from childhood games she used to play with us. Names only someone sentimental or secretive would use. One location repeated more than once, Sonoma, the old vineyard estate. Grandpa hadn't visited in years, but it was still under our name. By noon, I had a private charter booked. I didn't call ahead, didn't pack much. I just brought what mattered: the scanned amendment, the leather journal I hadn't dared open yet, and the quiet resolve that had been building inside me like kindling waiting for a single spark. The plane touched down just before sunset. The vineyard looked exactly like I remembered it, wild but not abandoned. Overgrown roses still crept along the low fence, and the soft hush of leaves in the breeze sounded like a lullaby from another life. I walked up the gravel path, heart thudding steadily, then rounded the bend to the terrace. She was there, alone, sitting in Grandpa's old teak chair, tea steaming from a white porcelain cup. Not a wrinkle in her dress, not a hair out of place, but her eyes, she looked like she hadn't slept either. "You found me," she said, not even surprised. She gestured toward the other chair. "Sit, if you like." I sat, slowly. We didn't talk for a moment. I studied her face, her jawline, still tense. The teacup trembled slightly as she set it down. I didn't mention it. "I suppose you've seen the amendment," she said. I nodded. "It's real. Richard Bellamy confirmed it." Her lips thinned. "Of course he did. He always thought you were the better one." I waited. Let silence fill the air between us like fog. She looked out over the vineyard. "Do you know what it was like, growing up with your father as the youngest, always overlooked? And then my own father, naming a child as heir before I even had a chance?" I didn't interrupt. Not this time. "I was never chosen," she whispered, barely audible. "So I didn't know how to raise someone who was." There it was, the wound, the raw, ugly truth sitting in her throat for decades, and somehow it made sense, not as an excuse, but as a map. "I didn't need to be chosen," I replied quietly. "You could have just loved me anyway." Her breath caught. For a second, she didn't look like the woman who iced me out of meetings or rewrote birthday cards to exclude me. She just looked tired, broken in a way that had nothing to do with age. She didn't ask for forgiveness. That in itself was the most honest thing she'd ever done. And I didn't offer it. Instead, I stood, walked toward the old cellar entrance beneath the terrace. She didn't follow. It took a few tries to find the right key. The cellar door creaked open, musty and cold. I turned on the dim overhead light and moved toward the corner near the wine racks. Grandpa always said that good wine and truth both needed darkness to mature. There, inside a sealed wooden box, was the leather-bound journal, his name etched into the front. I opened it slowly, my hands shaking a little. Inside was a letter, not notarized, not legal, just his handwriting. "To my girl who stayed with me when my hands trembled. Let them fight over the boardroom. This was always yours." Folded beneath the letter were 3 documents. The deed to the vineyard, a foundation in my name, with funding already transferred, and a list of projects he hoped I'd support. Not mandates, just hopes, scholarships, medical access for single mothers, community arts. Not once had he said revenge, only repair. I walked back up with the journal tucked against my chest. She was still on the terrace, watching the light fade over the hills. "I'm not here to destroy you," I said. "I'm just done carrying your shame." I placed a letter on the table beside her, not signed with love, just my name. Then I left. I didn't wait for her to read it. I didn't turn around when I reached the path. Sometimes peace comes not with closure, but with distance. 2 days later, back in the city, I stood on the office rooftop as the sun dipped behind the skyline. The air was quiet, but not hollow. A few employees had followed me up there, some with coffee in hand, others with guarded smiles. No one said much. They didn't have to. Respect doesn't need applause, just presence. I opened my laptop. The first file blinking at me was one I'd started weeks ago, back when I still doubted if I'd ever have a say again. Updated maternity and caregiver policy, draft. I opened it, reread every line, and smiled. Leadership isn't about being feared, it's about being remembered right. I shut the laptop gently, the last rays of sun glinting off the screen. Then I turned toward the stairs, toward the future, where no one could cast me out again. No more shadows,